Oh, what a privilege to be here this morning. I'm so glad to be here. Isn't it good to be among patriots? Isn't it good to be among people who love the Lord Jesus Christ? Isn't it good to be with people who know that God is not done with America yet? Let me just say, what a privilege it is to be here with my wife, Erin. I tell you what, she has been fighting for the innocent unborn in every court in this land, right up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And I don't know about you, but I think now more than ever, the innocent unborn in this country need a voice. Now more than ever, the innocent unborn need us to stand strong, to fight for them, and to say that life matters, that life is sacrosanct, and we will never give up on the right to life. Never, never, never. Would you join me in welcoming a champion for life all across this country, my wife, Erin Hawley?
Good morning. Thank you so much to Tony for such a nice introduction, as well as a surprise introduction from Josh. And I think you'll get to hear a little more from him later today as well. So I wanted to start this morning with just a little bit about what brought us to this day and this time, this moment in American history, and to this fight for life and for the family. So we have to start with Roe. Roe was an egregiously wrong decision that overturned the pro-life law of almost every single state. It's largely conceded that it was wrong. Professor at Yale and Harvard, John Hart-Ely, talked about it being not constitutional law and barely giving any sense of trying to be constitutional law. Lawrence Tribe from Harvard says its reasoning was a, quote, verbal smokescreen. Even the late Justice Ginsburg criticized it for disrupting the democratic process. The 7 male justices who authored and joined Roe, said that it, quote, forced upon women a distressful life and future. This was the vision of motherhood that gave us Roe. And yet, no one thought Roe would be reversed. If we think back to just months before the Dobbs oral argument, I was at a debate with a professor from Columbia, and he had actually worked for the Reagan administration. So I was making all these points that Roe's wrong, there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about the right to abortion, that the factors all justify that the Supreme Court overrule that wrong decision rather than sticking to it. And the professor sort of threw up his hands and said, look, I agree with you. I actually wrote a brief in the Reagan administration asking the Supreme Court to overrule Roe. He said, but it didn't happen then, and it won't ever happen. We have Dobbs now, and it's nothing short of miraculous. So many of you marched and prayed, volunteered at pregnancy care centers, supported pregnancy care centers, supported moms for years. And I just wanted to share a few of the background details of the Dobbs story that you may not know. One of the key players was a single mom turned nurse turned legislator named Becky Curry in Mississippi. So one of the most amazing parts of the Dobbs story to me is that while she was a nurse, Becky Curry helped deliver a 15-week-old child. The child was too young to live, and Becky describes holding the child, that child, as it struggled to live. Then Mississippi enacts its 15-week law, and Becky sponsors it. We have a cert petition that languished for months at the United States Supreme Court until that court changed, until Justice Amy Coney Barrett replaced Justice Ginsburg. We had Mississippi elect a new attorney general who was staunchly pro-life, Lynn Fitch, and she hired Scott Stewart, an accomplished appellate litigator who insisted that the right thing to do was ask the Supreme Court to overrule Roe and not take any moderate steps. Now that may seem, hindsight's always 20/20, that may seem like the obvious thing, but even staunchly pro-life lawyers at the time were saying, we need to take it easy. The Supreme Court's not going to overrule Roe, we need to ask for something moderate. Thank heavens, the Attorney General and her team asked for the right result. And one of the great things about the Dobbs decision is that it took place in what we could think of as the year of Jubilee. Roe governed for nearly 50 years. And of course, we know that the year of Jubilee is sort of a super Sabbath. It's a time to rest and be restored, to set the captives free. It's a year that is holy to the Lord. So there's no question that Dobbs was a monumental victory for life. It returned to the people the power to protect life. But as we sit here today, the pro-abortion forces have responded in kind. Today, we're seeing an all-out assault on the family, on children. We're seeing an administration that pushes abortion drugs across state lines without even necessary safeguards for women's health. Far from the now passé mantra that abortion be safe, legal, and rare, the left now says that women should shout their abortion. We're seeing medical information peddling false information, terrifying women, when the reality is that every state law, every one, allows doctors to do whatever is necessary to save the life of a mother, and no state prevents treatment for miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies. So we see 4 key areas of assault. I just want to talk about them briefly, and then about where we can go from here. So first, abortion drugs. We know that the Biden administration allows them to be mailed. They can be mailed to women, to their dorm rooms, to their home, without women ever seeing a doctor. In 2001, the FDA took away that last remaining doctor's visit. It's the only opportunity for a woman to check for things like an ectopic pregnancy or to accurately assess gestational age. But women's health was sacrificed to free, or more access, I should say, to abortion drugs. And make no mistake, these drugs are dangerous. They have a black box warning. They send roughly 1 in 25 women to the emergency room. And that was before the FDA took away that last remaining doctor's visit. Second, we have a media, by and large, that peddles the pro-abortion story. You all have probably all heard about the tragic death of Miss Amber Nicole Thurman. She died from an infection caused by abortion drugs. And a media outlet, ProPublica, tried to pin her death on Georgia's pro-life law. Many members of the media, and even politicians, even one running for president, jumped on the bandwagon and blamed Georgia's law. There's just one problem with this narrative. It is absolutely false. Georgia's law in no way prevented the treatment of Amber Thurman. In fact, that law didn't apply for at least 2 reasons. First, Amber's twins were already passed. The law didn't apply because any procedure would not have taken their life. And second, as mentioned, Georgia's law, like every law in the country, allows treatment, whatever treatment is necessary to save the life of a mother. I'm not sure why Amber didn't get that treatment, but I know it wasn't because of Georgia's pro-life law. In fact, the doctors involved in her case have never even suggested that their hands were bound by the law. Third, we see pro-abortion forces sort of changing their tune. They've long called themselves the pro-choice movement or the pro-choice party, but their recent actions suggest it's not really about choice at all, but about being pro-abortion. I'd like to introduce you to a young woman named McKenna. McKenna is a young new mom in Colorado. She was unexpectedly pregnant, and as she tells it, absolutely terrified. At 5 weeks, she ordered the abortion drugs and took the first one. She immediately regretted her decision and was distraught. She went online, Googled, is there any way to reverse this, and contacted the Abortion Pill Reversal Network. They set her up with a nurse practitioner who was able to provide progesterone. Progesterone, of course, is something that has been safely used to maintain pregnancies for 50-some years. So this woman, McKenna, took progesterone and recently delivered a healthy, beautiful baby girl that she says she could not imagine life without. There's a wonderful video, and McKenna just describes how she couldn't imagine life without her wonderful daughter. But there's just one catch. McKenna lives in a state where abortion pill reversal, just this provision of progesterone, is outlawed. You can take the abortion drug, but you can't try to save your baby. And in fact, the attorney generals of New York, as well as states like California, have sued pregnancy care centers just for sharing information about abortion pill reversal because they don't want women to change their mind. They don't want to give them the option of saving their baby's life. Fourth, the elephant in the room. We all know that we've seen tens of millions of dollars being dumped into pro-abortion ballot initiatives across the country. They say, the proponents, that they just want to go back to Roe and Casey. But the reality is much different. If you look at the language of those amendments, many of them go far beyond Roe and Casey. They impose something called strict scrutiny that would take away even modest things like a waiting period or informed consent or the requirement that a doctor be involved in a chemical abortion. They might also open up the door under the guise of reproductive care to the taxpayer funding of things like gender transition drugs or surgeries. It's not just going back to Roe. So with Roe gone, today at this moment, we're confronted with a reality, one we always knew, that its demise is not enough. What we need, what we've always needed, is a culture of life. But the fact that law is not enough is nothing new to Christians. If we think back to Galatians 3, Paul chastises the Galatians for relying on the law rather than relying on the power of the Spirit to motivate, to encourage, to change culture. We bear the challenging but oh so important mission of changing hearts and minds, of arguing for the reality that every man, woman, and child is uniquely created in the very image of God, created unique and priceless. A personal story that sort of brings this to mind is, as Tony mentioned, I had the opportunity to help and co-counsel with Mississippi in the Dobbs case. Well, the first time I went down to Mississippi, our daughter Abigail was an infant, and my boss asked if I could go, talk with them about strategy and those sorts of things, and said, I've got this baby, no. So she said, bring her along. And ADF, a wonderfully child-friendly policy, flew me down, flew my baby down, and also flew a babysitter down. But our babysitter also coached, and so she had to come in later than us, and her plane was delayed. So we're supposed to meet that morning and have an argument about, what the justices think, what have Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, they haven't written a lot on abortion before. What do we think are the arguments that would most appeal to them? Those sorts of deep in the weeds strategy, and our babysitter's not there. And Abby desperately needs a nap. So I'm literally running up and down the halls of the hotel with a stroller, trying to get her to sleep. And so she miraculously falls asleep right before the meeting. So I cover her with one of those little light blankets and park her stroller in the corner of the room, and we're good to go. So we're talking about the strategy, these details, and Abigail wakes up screaming bloody murder, like at the top of her lungs. So I was supposed to be professional, sort of new to this new job at Alliance Defending Freedom, and a little bit mortified. But on the other hand, it was just such an amazing picture of what it was that we were fighting for. We were there. Abigail, I'm biased. My husband Josh is especially biased. She is this beautiful, curly redhead, chubby little girl with just such a joyful spirit. But the reality is that she's not any more precious. She's not any more loved by God than any other child, each and every one of them deserving of life. But the reality is in America today, as we've just talked about, in creating a culture of life, we have our work cut out from ourselves. I remember watching a segment of Bill Maher when he was sort of debating abortion, and he said, life just isn't all that precious. And that sentiment just kills me, but that's what we have to change. The good news is that this isn't anything new for Christians. Changing culture isn't anything new. It was into a culture that children, and indeed women, were little more than chattel that Christianity first exploded onto the scene, transforming hearts and minds in a radical way. If we think back to the Roman world that gave birth to Christianity, infanticide, abortion, child sex abuse, the awful practice of something called exposito, which was exposing day-old infants to the elements because they were unwanted, was commonplace. Seneca regarded the drowning of children as both reasonable and justified. Plato and Aristotle agreed. Female infanticide was so prevalent in ancient Rome that men outnumbered women in great numbers, about 140 to 100, so 1.4 to 1. One letter from the first BCE describes Roman thinking. Hilarion wrote to his pregnant wife, "I ask and beg you to take good care of our baby son, and as soon as I receive payment," he was gone, "I shall send it up to you. If you are delivered of a child, if it is a boy, keep it. If a girl, discard it." As the historian Owen Bakke describes, children in the ancient world, the first century, were seen at best as property. What changed? In a word, Jesus. Historians have gone so far to say that Christianity invented childhood. Jesus gave dignity and worth to those in society, to those that society considered less than: women, foreigners, and children. Indeed, that's the whole Christian story, isn't it? This beautiful picture of a tiny, defenseless child born to an insignificant family to save the entire world. And as an adult, that child, Jesus, had so much to say about the dignity and worth of children. Jesus delighted in them, and he radically reformed culture. He called the little children to him, and he flummoxed the religious leaders of the day when he said that the kingdom of heaven would be made up of such of these. In addition to those that the world regarded as outcasts, he said, "Be wary if you cause these little ones to stumble." We know that Jesus showed the Father's heart. And that just makes me think of our daughter Abigail, who I've mentioned. We have two gorgeous boys, almost 12 and almost 10, that are the delight of our eyes. But I have to say, Abigail's name means the Father's delight. And Abby knows that she is her father's delight. She bats those little 3-year-old eyes, and her daddy is like totally slayed. So he's been traveling a lot, as you might expect. And so every time before he leaves, she says, "Daddy, bring me something." And Daddy obliges. Recently, we were at the grocery store, and she wanted some stuffed animal. I was like, "No, Abigail, we're not going to get anything today. We're just here for groceries." And you could tell she was debating between like throwing a full-scale tantrum or acquiescing. And so she thought about it for a second, and she goes, "That's okay. I asked Daddy." And I love this picture that Abigail shows of just the full confidence in her dad's love. She knows that she is her father's delight. And the truth of that is that's true for all of us. It's true for women who have unplanned pregnancies, and it's true for those unborn children. So I think today we can take inspiration from two lessons from the early church. First, they boldly spoke countercultural truth that women and children matter. And second, they created this culture of life that we've been talking about it. They did this sacrificially. Theologian Rodney Snark attributes the rapid growth of Christianity in the first century to the fact that its adherents improved people's lives. Rome endured 2 devastating plagues in the first couple of centuries, and Christians acted counterculturally. In his Easter letter, Dionysius writes about the heroic nursing efforts of early Christians, so much so that it irritated the Emperor Julian. He instructed pagan priests to keep pace with Christians, and he wrote to the high priest in Galatia in 362, demanding that the pagan worshipers needed to equal the virtues of Christians. He said that the growth in Christianity was caused by their, quote, moral character, however pretended, specifically their benevolence towards strangers. They support not only their poor, but ours as well, and everyone can see that we lack aid to them. This culture of life that the Christian community committed to and encapsulated in the first century extended dignity and worth to every member of society. This was a stark contrast to ancient Rome, where the father determined whether a pregnant woman would have an abortion. Even today, we know that fathers are often the most influential person in a woman's decision. Yet, at a recent White Dudes for Harris event, Pete Buttigieg pushed Kamala Harris for president because, quote, men are more free when abortion is easily accessible. He said the quiet part out loud, acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, abortion isn't all about a woman's choice. In fact, evidence shows that most women who have an abortion don't do so from a position of empowerment. One survey performed by Human Coalition says that the vast majority of women who've had an abortion said they would have chosen to parent if their circumstances were different. Nearly a quarter in another survey said that their abortions were either coerced or unwanted. And an astounding 60% of women said they would have preferred to have a child if they'd had either greater emotional or financial security. These statistics are heartbreaking because they suggest that many women don't think they have a real option. Yet in the tradition of the early church, Christians can act counterculturally. We can come alongside these moms, telling them that they are the beloved daughters of the King Most High, that they matter more than any mistake that they might have made. Through pro-family policies, through supporting pregnant moms, through Pregnancy and Beyond, through pregnancy care centers that are under such assault from the left, through economic policies that make it possible to support a family and to have children, we must transform culture. The threats facing our children, facing women, facing our families, it turns out, are far from new. But thankfully, we as believers can return to one of our earliest missions, that is supporting women and children. We can recover the legacy of the first century believers and radically transform culture. This may not be an easy task, but we are living in a moment of challenge, but also of great opportunity. It's a moment that matters to the direction of our country. It's a moment when it matters to be a conservative, to be pro-life, to be pro-woman, and to be pro-family. When your voice, the voice of all of the people in this room, is all the more important. And we know, always, that we are not alone, that His Spirit empowers us and protects us, and that He can do the unimaginable. Dobbs, after all, was never supposed to happen.
Aren't I a lucky man? Do you mind if I say just one word more? I have to tell you, at this time, and a time of chaos and confusion, and a time of trial that we are facing, I think it's time that we say clearly with one voice, there is no right more important than the right to life. There is no right more foundational than the right to life. It is time that we made clear that the right to life is not some added extra in our society. It's not a luxury good. The right to life is absolutely foundational to everything we believe in as conservatives. And it is right there in our Declaration of Independence, is it not? The foundational principles of this country built on life, right there in the Declaration, that we are given our rights, inalienable rights, by a creator, not by government, not by some bureaucrat somewhere, by a creator. And what is the first of those rights that God gives us? It is the right to life. It is the right to life in His image. And we know as conservatives that it is this right to life, it is the equal dignity of every single child, whether they are anticipated or not, whether they're planned for or not, no matter what their skin color or eye color or hair color is, no matter where they live, no matter where they're from, every single person is created in the image of God. That is our foundational truth. It is our foundational commitment, and we need to say it again boldly and unashamedly. And we need to say that this country, if we do not have a culture of life in this country, what will it mean for the United States of America? Erin just said it. A culture that does not love life, a culture that does not protect the innocent unborn, is a culture that becomes harsh. It's a culture that becomes callous. It's a culture that is all too willing to discard those who it deems weak or unworthy or less than. That is not the United States of America. That's not the America I know. That's not the America we're fighting for. So let's take our stand boldly together now and say again to this nation that life is worth fighting for. And as our fellow citizens go to the polls, Erin mentioned this, in state after state, Americans will be going to the polls to vote on the issue of life. They'll be voting on whether or not to protect life in their state constitutions and in their state laws. And we're so thankful that they finally have the chance to do so, that the Supreme Court has finally recognized that Roe was wrongly decided, that Roe was an abomination in the Constitution, that now the issue of life again belongs to the people and their elected representatives. And as the people go to the polls, let's be clear as conservatives, and yes, as Republicans, that we advocate life, that we urge our fellow Americans to support life, and we will do everything we can to protect life in the law all across this country. This is absolutely foundational. I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you with this. I think sometimes it's easy to get discouraged, and we're in the midst of a great fight now, for the fight for the future of our country, for the heart of our country. I have to say there's not much that Joe Biden and I agree on. But of course, there's not much that he remembers from yesterday. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But he's right about one thing. He says often that we are in a struggle for the soul of America. Well, he's right about that. He's right about that. The American soul, though, as we know, the American soul is good because it is shaped by the foundational truths of the Bible. Our history is shaped by the foundational truths of the Bible. And now, as we come to this critical hour, let's say that we are thankful to live in such a time as this, that we're thankful to live in a time of challenge, that we're thankful to live in a time when the choices that we make matter. Whatever else you say about this era that we live in, Lord willing, when we look back on it in 10 or 20 years, 30 years from now, you will not say to your kids, oh, it was a boring time. Nothing ever happened in the 2020s. You won't say that. What you'll say is, it was a time when our most foundational beliefs, the right to life and liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the right to conscience, the right to worship the Lord as he calls us, those things were at stake. Those things were on the line. That's what you'll tell your children and your grandchildren. And here's what I want to tell them, is that in that time of trial, in this time of challenge, we stood together and we saved the United States of America. We stood together and we changed the direction of this country. We stood together and we saved our Constitution. So let's not be discouraged. Don't lose heart. Don't lose the faith. Stand now strong, because the Lord has given us the great privilege of living in a time when our choices matter, when our lives matter, when our courage matters. So let's stand together and save this great country. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.